Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Sustainability in Motion podcast, brought to you by ED4S. We focus on the fast-moving sustainability world to help people better understand the sustainability environmental challenges that we face. I'm joined by Nawar Alsaadi, founder and CEO of Kanata Advisors and chief advisor to ED4S.
Hello, Matt. I'm really looking forward to going through this episode. I think we'll have a great conversation. Today,
our guest is Marie-Josée Privyk, the founder of FinComm Services, which provides companies with sustainability reporting guidance. MJ is here to talk about ESG reporting. MJ, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Before we jump into things, tell the audience a little bit about yourself and how you got here and a little bit about FinComm Services.
Sure. My background is actually capital markets. In a prior lifetime, I was a financial analyst, and I also worked in investor relations. And I think that's important. I was actually in investor relations when I fell into sustainable development, responsible investment, and actually the connection between the two. And why do I think it's important? Because I think that investors shift towards responsible investing and their information needs is a huge driver for companies and for expectations about company reporting. Information is a lifeblood of capital markets. Better information makes markets more efficient. We all want markets to be as efficient as possible, including companies, because that means, more accurate valuation of their companies. And it's that, consideration of all of ESG factors into investors' decisions that's really been driving the market until recently. Now it's expanded in recent years to more stakeholders. We could talk about that maybe a little bit later on, but anyway, and so, I've been in this space for the last 12 years, very much at the connection between investors and corporates or within the corporate sustainability reporting space, have followed it very closely ever since. It was an aha moment for me. A little bit also of, finance getting its purpose back, because I loved what I did as an analyst, finance, but I always thought maybe there was something missing as to the why we were doing all of this. And that led me to advisory. I did spend the last 3.5 years with an ESG data management software platform, Visto, which I think is technology, a way to democratize access to solutions to help companies, transition to sustainability reporting. Mm-hmm. And now back to my advisory roots, I guess, if you so to speak.
That's great. I didn't know you start off in IR, as did I, which just goes to show you can't trust people who start off in IR in the finance world.
I started as an analyst. Hey.
a background in IR. All right. Well, we got a lot to talk about, so I'll jump right into it. Our listeners and the sustainability world in general, the people listening to this podcast are likely either preparing, interpreting, or mandating ESG reporting in some way. So let's start off at that high level and speak about, why ESG reporting matters, why stakeholders are asking for it, and what companies can get out of it.
Yeah, I think that's a super important question. And it's good that it's the first question, because I think that's the starting point, is understanding why anybody should do anything. Applies to everything, applies to this as well. And first and foremost, it matters for companies to report because their stakeholders are asking them to. Their stakeholders want to know what they're doing about their material, environmental, social, and governance issues. When we say stakeholders, who do we mean? Definitely investors, but also large customers, also perhaps consumers if you have, consumer goods and services, also employees, could also be the government, NGOs, in some cases, local communities, if you have, business activities where you must interact and you are dependent on your relations with the local communities. All of these are actually business counterparts. They make decisions that will affect the company's ability to conduct its business. And that's where it gets material. And why do these stakeholders want to know about these material, environmental, social, and governance issues and how companies are managing them? That's the, second level of why, is because, in my opinion, there is a growing collective awareness of two things. The first is that the explicit consideration of these material, environmental, social, and governance issues makes for better management of the business. as long as we're talking about material issues, material business issues, it really is connected to better managing the business, better managing risks, opportunities, and that translates to financial performance, which ultimately translates to valuation. And the second is that there's also a growing collective awareness that we are running into what I call, we're running into the wall ecologically and socially speaking, and that business as usual cannot continue because we are destroying the very conditions on which we depend to live and exist. And that applied to business means that companies need to start identifying, measuring, and managing the impact that their businesses are having on the ecosystem on which they depend to survive and to thrive. And that's where you start to talk about impact. And so the stakeholders care about that, collectively speaking, and that's why they're asking for more and more information about that. What companies can get out of it, why is this good for companies to do? Like I mentioned before, better risk management, better management, period. And that's not to be underestimated. I think a lot of people think that risk management is, unsexy or unexciting. But I think, avoided costs, avoided problems, are a super important part of managing a business, especially when you're thinking, short, medium, long term. And, there are risks like physical risks, if you're talking about climate catastrophes, business risk, if you are a beverage company, the risk of running out of water, which can literally be a thing. Regulatory risks, changing laws and regulations that are going to make something that you're doing either illegal or more expensive, or conversely, create an opportunity if you're actually going in the same direction as the regulation. Legal risk, the liability from either not doing something or from not reporting properly, and reputational risk, again, either because you're not doing something or because you're saying you're doing something that you're not actually doing. So, there are a lot of different kinds of risks that a company should be managing for. And on the flip side, identifying opportunities which lie in these businesses contributing to the needs and problems of society and the environment, and meeting the informational expectations and the behavior expectations of those business counterparts I talked about before, those stakeholders, does translate into more or less revenues, more or less expenses and profits and cash flows, cheaper debt, or more expensive debt, cheaper or more expensive insurance costs, better access to capital. And again, all of these things, drive to value creation.
That was an amazing overview of the why, MJ. It reminds me, I think, of a quote by Friedrich Nietzsche, who talks about he who has, or she who has a why can bear any how. I think there's a bit of that in what you're explaining. But, let's dive a little bit on what companies are doing today, and also in the context of the why. In terms of ESG reporting, I mean, you've looked at a lot of companies in the context of the different positions that you've had. And I think lately, obviously working with an ESG disclosure software company. What companies are getting right and wrong with ESG reporting? What challenges are you seeing, and what can be done to solve them? I may have a follow-up question, but maybe I'll just stop here for now.
Sure. I love that quote, by the way. It's difficult to answer that question very succinctly because sustainability maturity is a spectrum. Every company is a little bit different, and they're really all over the spectrum. You have companies that are very, very mature. You have companies that are just starting out. It's not a competition per se. This is something all companies need to do, and it takes time. It's a process. It's a journey. Some people say we shouldn't use the word journey. I think it's a great word because I think it really illustrates what this is about. It's a paradigm shift. I'd say maybe the biggest hurdle is still very much a lack of understanding and awareness of what this is, what companies are being asked to do or expected to do, what that means for them. So just generally speaking, a lack of awareness. Companies that get it right are those that start to do something, even in the absence of perfect data, perfect information, or perfect clarity on, what exactly that's going to end up looking like. Companies that get it wrong are the ones who procrastinate and deny and wait to be dragged kicking and screaming for regulations to come into effect. Another maybe common mistake or occurrence that we see is to see reporting as a compliance exercise. Whether it's responding to an actual regulation or just complying with a customer or an investor asking you to do something, just to see this as, I'm doing it because I have to, or thinking that it's like a once and done. I'm going to put out a report, then I can go back to business as usual and they're going to leave me alone. This is a paradigm shift in how to think about business, how to manage a company, and also therefore about how to talk about its performance. Companies that get it right are the ones that embrace the change and understand what the real objective is. Companies that get it wrong are the ones that try to dispatch this very quickly and also, doing it as a separate activity. Reporting is a separate standalone activity from running the business and managing, their issues. And the third thing I would say that also happens is that for those companies that did start, that do get it, and that are wanting to transition, and they usually have somebody, on the inside that is embracing the change and would really like to do things for real. The biggest challenge becomes resources. Until the board and the C-suite get it, until there is a fundamental understanding of integrating ESG sustainability throughout in really the business model of the company, there is, generally speaking, a huge lack of resources. In terms of, whether it's people, whether it's technology, whether it's external advice to bring in, to fill in the gaps in learning and understanding until it can be internalized. And all of that obviously boils down to, budgets, capital allocation, money. But I think that's still a huge challenge for most companies.
Well, that's helpful, MJ, but something we'd like to do here at the podcast is really give our listeners something to sink their teeth in. And I think to bring this paradigm to life, I think would be helpful perhaps to share an example of a company or companies you think that are doing a great job, that somebody, listening to us can go there and open a sustainability report or a collection of documents issued by these entities that you think is a good example of a company doing it the right way, or maybe you didn't come across a company that kind of lives up to your expectations.
Yeah, and I hope I don't disappoint you, Nawar, in the response I would give you to that question. It's not that, my expectations are so high and that, every company, disappoints or isn't up to par. Not at all. It's really more that I don't give specific examples because I don't think there is one company that does everything perfectly right. And it may be misleading to point people to a particular company's report and say, oh, look at that report. That's a good report, where there are pieces of it that are really good and then other pieces that might be less good. And I've generally found when you do see these examples in whatever guidance or reports and white papers that are published, it's usually like a compendium of examples, right? On this particular action item, this company did it right. On this particular action item, this company did it right. So I think I'm just avoiding the confusion. I would answer the question this way, though. What I, generally speaking, like to see in a report, what would make me consider a report a good report is one that generally follows at least one standard, because I think you do need to follow a standard to make your disclosures comparable, the idea being everybody using the same standard. A report that's well scoped out and well defined. This is our reporting period. This is the activities we cover, whether it's your operations or your entire value chain. These are the standards that we used, whether it's the information is externally assured or not, et cetera. So giving that context to understand the report. And one that clearly articulates why the material issues that were selected for reporting, why they're material to the company, how the company is managing them, and then how it's performing on them over time, right? This is important for us because this is what we're doing about it. And hey, we're doing well, we're not so well, this worked well, we're going to improve on this. To do that over time, also to be able to see performance over time. When you look at financial statements, you've got 2, 3, 5 years of historical financial performance because you want to be able to see the trend. Should be the same thing in sustainability. And then if you do have targets, how your performance stacks up against those targets. Targets are great, but if you have no idea whether you're on track to achieving them or not, they're of little, informational value. And then I would say I like a report if it's released, at the same time or close to financial reporting, because the two are interconnected on the same reporting period. So those are the things that I look for if I'm assessing a report to say, is this good or not? Or, where are the gaps and how could it improve? Those are the kinds of things that I look for.
Right, fair enough. Maybe the next podcast will get you to share examples of reports or parts of reports that you do like. But let's just change gears a little bit and jump into regulation, which is obviously at the end of the day, it's unfortunately or fortunately is driving things for a lot of companies. I'm just wondering, what regulations are you tracking in this field? What should companies and investors expect around ESG reporting and regulations related to ESG reporting, both, locally in Canada and also globally? Any pieces of regulation or certain trends that you think that our listeners should, focus on in the future?
Certainly. First, I will caveat by saying it's virtually impossible for any one individual to follow absolutely everything that's going on in this space, because as we all know, it's moving very, very quickly, and there's lots going on really across the globe. Personally, I follow very closely what's happening in Europe because I think they have the right idea. It's a very comprehensive set of policy initiatives that are targeting, capital allocation writ large, achieving, more sustainable activities, and regulating both investor behavior and corporate behavior, regulating behavior and disclosures. Very, very comprehensive set of regulation. So in particular, obviously, when it comes to reporting, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, and all of what they are mandating. And I think the CSRD epitomizes what I see as the major trend or transformation in corporate sustainability reporting, which is going, from an essentially voluntary communications exercise to a regulated, standardized, audited, and digitized disclosure. That's exactly what the CSRD is prescribing. The other area of regulations I follow closely is what's happening with the IOSCO, which is the International Organization of Securities Commissions, which is the group of securities regulators, because they have made, some public statements about the need for more and better information, for widely available, comparable, reliable disclosures. That was the phrase that everybody in the G7, G20, SEC, IOSCO was Financial Stability Board was repeating. And they have recommended they've publicly endorsed the IFRS Sustainability Disclosure Standards. They've recommended to their 134 members across the globe, which is 95% of capital markets, to embed the IFRS Sustainability Disclosure Standards into their regulatory reporting regimes. We've started to see some announcements coming out. The UK, Brazil, Australia, Nigeria, Turkey, Pakistan, expect many, many more in the coming months and years to make similar announcement. How all of that's going to unfold, what it's going to look like, still early days, but still. In Canada, we are seeing signs of progress. Now, we've seen initiatives with respect to climate disclosures. So, OSFI B15, for federally incorporated financial institutions, disclosure regulations on climate. We also have a new disclosures on forced labor, child labor in the supply chain, again, for federally incorporated corporations in Canada. Bill S211. So there's going to be, the Canada Business Corporations Act, board diversity statistics. So it's been a little bit piecemeal with respect to securities regulators. So the Canadian Securities Administrators have followed closely the developments of the IFRS Sustainability Disclosure Standards. In Canada, we have a system where we have parallel boards that, so we have the Canadian Sustainability Standards Board that was created to review and approve call it Canadian version of the IFRS SDS. They announced just last week that They had finalized the first draft of their first two standards, CSDS 1 and 2, that they were going to be releasing them in March for consultation. So we can expect, final standards, hopefully by the end of 24, the Canadian Securities Administrators transferring that into new disclosure regulations, proposed at least for consultation in maybe 2025. We could be looking at regulated sustainability disclosures using a version of the IFRS SDS, in 2026. So for the report coming out in 2027 for the fiscal 26 reporting period, something like that could be happening in Canada. So let's hope so. Fingers crossed.
Okay, MJ. So we're now going to make you an all-powerful regulator, something I know every financial professional fantasizes about. If you were such an entity, you're a regulator, and you could make a sustainability regulation, or I guess set of regulations. Don't go too crazy. What are we missing? What are the thing you would want us to focus on that Europe hasn't gotten to in their regulation, or you think is more important than what they've addressed?
Yeah, the power. I wish. Well, I'll start off by saying, I think we're generally on the right track with what we're seeing in Europe, with what we're seeing with the different jurisdictions and IOSCO and, China. The Chinese exchanges recently announced that they have some disclosure regulations. So I think we're generally on the right track with, making disclosures mandatory, standardized, audited, and digitized. And really what this is about is bringing sustainability disclosures to the same level as financial disclosures. We just need to do it a lot faster than the decades that it took to get to this level that we have today of financial disclosures. So I don't know that I would change anything. I would double down on making it mandatory. And again, I think Europe has the right idea. Large companies, small companies, public companies, private companies, because it's the entire value chain. They're going to get pulled into it. We're seeing it already. So smaller private companies are getting pulled into this reporting transformation because their large customers are needing to comply. And so they might as well do it in an orderly, standardized fashion that is going to, in the end, be more cost effective for them. And that's one of the reasons why the European, legislators decided to go forward with the CSRD, is because in the end, ultimately, it should reduce, or it will increase the burden versus doing nothing for sure, but it will make it much more efficient than if it was an unregulated, completely voluntary, multiple standard kind of environment that we had, until recently. The one thing I would add as a regulator is create a mechanism to unblock funding for companies to embrace this change, because I think it's not an easy change to make. It's transformational. It takes resources. Takes time. And whether it's subsidies, grants, tax deductions, I don't know, we have to unblock capital to make companies embrace that change.
Yeah, that gets to a kind of follow-up I thought of, is that whole issue of, is this something that is, do companies just look at this as compliance, or do they take it more as a way to help differentiate themselves and help set strategy? And the mechanism you're talking about, I know, we all know a lot of really big companies that have a handful, if that, number of people devoted to this stuff. And it's very similar on the investor side. And I've always argued for both sides to have more people devoted to this, because you're going to get better outcomes. And with, as you said, if this is a European, the CSRD, CSDDD are regulations that are going to cover firms around the world. So if you're a mid-sized company in the US and you're supplying a European company, this is going to hit you too.
Absolutely.
But talk briefly about the whole, how you see and how your clients see, and what proportion of them treat it as just compliance, and they complain about compliance, which that's fair enough, and others that see it is ingrained in setting strategy and running the company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question, and almost a trick question, because I do think that most companies that have been through a few rounds of reporting, or that engage with their stakeholders, understand that it isn't merely a compliance exercise. I don't need to do this just because somebody's asking me to do this. I understand that I need to be putting out this information and providing this information to my stakeholders.
Right.
However, most companies, I think, still see reporting as an end in itself and as a standalone activity. And I guess, well, it connects to your original question. That's what prevents them from seeing it as a management tool, as a measure of accountability, and a way to more efficiently manage their issues, which is ultimately what this should be. ESG data, sustainability data, should be first and foremost used by them to understand their performance and tweak what they need to tweak in order to improve their performance, and then eventually set targets in order to achieve, change. And I think that is still not largely embedded in corporate practices. I think they still think of sustainability reporting as a standalone, albeit an important exercise, a standalone exercise. And that's, I think, important, because it's when you do understand it as a management tool that you start to get the real benefits from looking at identifying, managing your material ESG risks and opportunities, and even your impact.
That's actually a great segue to the next question, which is, it's really about what you're doing right now, MJ, with the launch of FinComm. Are you trying to help companies with exactly solving for that question, or are you helping them, or you plan to help them with the ESG kind of reporting compliance side? I think it'd be great if you can just give us a little bit more color of where do you come into play, and what can FinComm offer its clients?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. Happy to give you a little bit more color there. I think the companies need to first and foremost understand the why, because I think that's what will help them unblock the resources to actually do it. And also, when you understand the why, it makes, change management easier. Change management is never simple, but it makes it easier. So part of my services is informational, understanding what you're being asked to do, why you're being asked to do it. What does that entail? And then the other part of my services is, okay, now what do you do? So tools, practical advice and tools to jumpstart reporting if you haven't started, improve your reporting if you've already started and you've already done a few rounds and you want to know, okay, how do I make it more fit for purpose? Fit for purpose being meeting the needs of your stakeholders, meeting the market demands for the information, but also eventually the regulatory requirements that you may already be facing or may be facing down the road. And that, that's for all kinds of companies, large, small, public, private, because again, private companies, may not be required, or they're not getting asked by investors, but they are definitely starting to get asked by their large customers. And I'm starting to see that we are replicating with this, second tier of companies, what we experienced 5, 6, 10 years ago with the larger companies, which was myriad of voluntary, standards and or questionnaires coming at you left and right. And so companies had these multiple different questionnaires, no two quite the same, having to answer, to different stakeholders or, similar information, but not exactly the same, not really sure understanding what it is that they were trying to, or what they were supposed to provide. And I think we need to avoid repeating that mistake. So the solution has been, standardization. I think that's an important tool that we can, right away implement it throughout the value chain. So again, those small companies. And I've also always thought that I have a place in my heart for small, medium-sized companies. I was a small mid-cap analyst when I was an analyst in my first life. And if we believe that managing ESG issues, managing impacts is good business, good for the company, good for the ecosystem, and it's creating value, why would it be the privilege of larger companies? It shouldn't be the privilege of larger companies. It should be for every company. Now, it has to be right-sized, and it doesn't have to be particularly complicated. I think companies can start relatively simple with whatever resources they do have available. Like, granted, we talked about resources. I think there needs to be an allocation of resources to do more and to do better. But its size should not be a prohibitive factor in embracing the paradigm shift and getting value out of it.
Well, thanks, MJ. That was a lot of great stuff. And I know our listeners have gotten a lot out of it. Thanks again.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
Well, everybody, this concludes our episode. And again, thanks for listening. Feel free to reach out to us and let us know topics you think we should discuss. Nawar and myself and MJ are all very active on LinkedIn. So you can reach out to us in that way and other social media platforms. And if you want to reach out to ED4S itself, feel free to do so. Take care. See you next time.